Men are locking women out of their lives to play video games and chill. 45% of women in the United States between the ages of 25 and 44 will be single and childless by the year 2030. That is not a prediction from some fringe thinker. That is a straight projection from serious economic analysts. And it is happening right now as men across the world quietly step back from the game entirely. Listen close, because this is not some temporary trend or a phase that will blow over when the economy improves or when people get lonely enough to settle. This is men locking women out of their daily lives in ways that are reshaping entire societies from the ground up. And if you think the consequences are going to stay small, you need to hear the full picture, because what comes next will hit harder than anyone wants to admit. If you're enjoying these Angry Guy videos, you can show support by buying me a Red Bull with a one-time gift or a monthly pledge using the link in the description. You sit down with a cold drink and look around, and you start to notice the pattern everywhere once you open your eyes to it. Men are not raging or protesting in the streets with signs. They are simply choosing different paths that do not include chasing relationships or building lives centered around women the way previous generations did, without question. It starts small, with a guy deciding he would rather spend his evenings gaming or working on a side project than swiping on apps or forcing small talk at bars where the energy feels off. Then it spreads as more men see their friends living calmer lives with more money in the bank and fewer headaches. The result is not chaos or loud conflict. It is a slow, steady withdrawal that leaves entire systems built on the old assumptions about men and women scrambling to adjust. In the United States alone, the numbers paint a clear picture of what is coming. By 2030, nearly half of women in those prime working and family forming years will be navigating life without a partner and without children. Factor in single mothers who face their own set of daily realities, and that figure climbs even higher into the 60 to 70% range for many communities. This is not women choosing freedom in some empowered story. This is the direct outcome of men deciding that the risks and costs no longer match the rewards they once saw in traditional setups. Think about how this plays out in everyday spaces that used to mix men and women without much friction. Restaurants that relied on couples coming in for dates or groups splitting checks are watching their traffic shift because fewer men are stepping up to cover the bill or plan the night out. Upscale spots that counted on men treating women to nice meals are seeing tables sit empty on weekends while the staff wonders where the steady flow went. Men used to be the ones driving a big chunk of that spending when it came to shared experiences. But now they are keeping their wallets closed tighter and focusing their cash on things that give them direct value without the drama. Bars and clubs tell the same story. You walk into one on a Friday night, and instead of balanced crowds, you see clusters of women sitting around with no drinks arriving because the guys who once bought rounds have found better ways to spend their time and energy. Women are not ordering as much on their own, and the atmosphere feels thinner without the mix that used to keep the place lively. Gyms that built their business on men showing up consistently for heavy lifting sessions are adjusting too. When men started feeling watched or judged, or simply decided they could get the same workout at home with basic equipment or in private male focused setups, the attendance dropped, and so did the revenue that kept those big facilities running at full capacity. It's just not happening in isolation in one corner of the world. Look at South Korea, where the birth rate has sunk to levels that worry government planners more than almost anywhere else. People point fingers at the 4B movement, where some women declare they will skip dating, marriage, sex, and children as a form of pushback against what they see as unfair pressures. But dig past the headlines, and you see a different engine at work. Men there responded to certain feminist demands in ways that flipped the script entirely. When policies were pushed that treated repeated approaches as potential harassment, men simply stopped approaching beyond a strict limit and let the rules stand. Workplaces saw women accuse men of gatekeeping opportunities, so men took that at face value and began prioritizing other men for collaborations and promotions without apology. Entertainment that once mixed edgy humor from both sides got sanitized under equality arguments, and men who already tuned out left women with content that felt flat and less engaging. The outcome was not women gaining ground in the ways expected. It was men creating distance that accelerated the drop in pairings and births because the everyday interactions that used to lead to relationships dried up. Japan and China show echoes of the same pattern, with men focusing inward on careers, hobbies, or quiet routines while birth numbers keep sliding. The United States is tracking towards similar territory not because of one policy, but because of thousands of small decisions men make every day to protect their time and mental space. Men have always been wired to solve problems and build systems that work for them. When the old system started feeling like it demanded more effort for less respect and higher risks in areas like divorce or false accusations, many simply opted for the exit ramp. They did not announce it with manifestos. They just stopped texting, first stopped planning elaborate dates, and stopped volunteering help in situations where it once felt natural. A woman whose car breaks down on the side of the road might wait longer now because the passing guys who used to jump out with tools have learned that offering assistance can sometimes lead to complications or zero appreciation. Electricians and handymen who used to take calls from anyone now quote higher rates when they sense the client is coming from a certain mindset, or they prioritize jobs from people they know will value the work without extra negotiation. It is not hatred driving this, it is practicality. Men see the data on who pays the bulk of taxes and who drives most consumer spending, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. Men still handle around 80% of the tax burden in many economies, while women account for a similar share of everyday purchases. When men work fewer hours or shift into minimalist lifestyles, that tax revenue stream shrinks, and programs that once counted on steady funding feel the pinch. The manosphere, as some call it, is not a dark corner of the internet anymore. It is a broad network of content that speaks directly to male interests, from finance to fitness to analyzing social dynamics with clear logic. Channels that used to focus only on stock picks or game reviews now weave in discussions about how gender expectations affect real life outcomes for men. Mathematicians apply models to break down behavior patterns. Gamers talk about how titles change when certain influences push for alterations in stories or characters. The common thread is men seeking information that helps them navigate the world as it actually exists rather than as old ideals promised. Young men are building relationships with artificial intelligence tools for conversation and companionship because those interactions stay consistent without the emotional labor that often drains real world exchanges. In the adult content space, companies are racing to develop artificial intelligence options that could shift entire platforms away from human performers within a short time frame. Men are not sitting idle waiting for things to improve. They are pivoting into decentralized spaces like crypto trading, skill bartering, and prepping, where they control the rules and the risks. Consider the overseas angle because it reveals how selective the withdrawal really is. Men who still want connection or companionship are boarding flights to places where women still carry themselves with traditional feminine energy that feels refreshing after years of tension at home. Countries like the Philippines offer lower living costs and attitudes that align better with what many men value in daily life. A guy earning a Western salary can live like royalty there while building something stable without the constant second guessing that became common back home. This is not every man packing up and leaving. It is enough men choosing that path to signal that the domestic market for relationships has lost its appeal for a growing segment. Back in Western societies, the spaces that used to serve as neutral ground for meeting people are emptying out. Men who once hit the gym to stay sharp now set up home setups or join invite only groups where the focus stays on lifting and camaraderie without distractions. Clubs that thrived on mixed crowds now host nights where women outnumber men significantly, and the energy shifts because the buyers of drinks and the planners of nights out are absent. Women spent decades pushing narratives that framed men as the source of most problems in society. Movements highlighted grievances and encouraged skepticism toward traditional male roles. Men absorbed those messages, and instead of fighting back in the streets, they did something quieter and more effective. They walked away and built lives that did not revolve around proving their worth to anyone. Savings rates for single men are climbing even in tough economic times because they keep their expenses low and invest in tools, skills, and assets that compound over time. Happiness surveys show many of them reporting higher satisfaction with simpler routines centered on purpose and peace rather than constant performance for approval. Meanwhile, women who traded reliance on individual men for reliance on state support are finding that governments are facing their own budget shortfalls. Tax shortfalls mean fewer resources for programs that once filled gaps, and suddenly the safety net looks thinner than expected. The state cannot replace the practical support and stability that came from committed partnerships, and men are not rushing back to volunteer for the old provider script. This shift is accelerating with technological changes that give men more options than ever. Artificial intelligence is not just taking over routine jobs. It is creating new decentralized work models where individuals with skills in coding, trading, or crafting can operate outside traditional corporate structures. Men who adapt quickly thrive in these environments because they focus on results and efficiency without layers of bureaucracy or social expectations getting in the way. Women who are encouraged to pursue certain career paths or lifestyles find themselves competing in spaces that reward traits men have historically leaned into more naturally under pressure. The consumer economy that counted on steady spending from dual income households or from women making purchases feels the strain when men tighten their belts and prioritize long term security over short term gratification. Day trading communities, skill sharing networks, and bartering circles are growing in ways that often stay male dominated because the entry points favor those willing to take calculated risks and learn through trial and error without needing external validation. Look at the restaurant industry again, because the numbers do not lie when you track foot traffic over years. Men traditionally covered a large portion of dining out expenses, especially when dates or group outings were involved. As those outings decline, the mid tier and upscale venues lose their reliable customer base. Staff hours get cut, and locations that once felt vibrant start to close earlier or reduce menus. The same logic applies to entertainment venues that built business models around mixed gender crowds looking for fun nights. When men decide the juice is not worth the squeeze, the whole ecosystem adjusts downward. Gym memberships that relied on male heavy usage for revenue see churn when guys migrate to garage setups or private facilities. The big chain locations respond with more classes or amenities aimed at different demographics, but the core lifting culture that drove profits shifts elsewhere. These are not overnight collapses, but steady erosions that compound into real economic pressure over time. South Korea offers a clear case study in how actions and reactions play out when trust erodes. Women pushed for rules around repeated contact in social settings to address what they saw as unwanted advances. Men complied by limiting themselves strictly, and the prolonged back and forth that sometimes led to connection simply stopped. In professional environments, accusations of gatekeeping led men to openly state preferences for working with other men in competitive settings. Media content that once included sharp banter from both sides got toned down in the name of balance, and audiences that preferred the old style drifted away, leaving the remaining viewers with safer but less compelling material. The birth rate did not drop solely because of one movement on one side. It dropped because everyday interactions between men and women became more cautious and less frequent overall. Men focused on their own advancement and peace, while women found themselves navigating a landscape where the old assumptions about male pursuit no longer held. Similar dynamics are visible in other high pressure economies, where long work hours and high living costs already make family formation challenging. When you layer on eroded trust, the numbers slide faster. Men are survival oriented by nature. When the environment changes, they adapt by seeking efficiency and minimizing unnecessary exposure to risk. Women have historically leaned more toward consumption and social connectivity in their spending and planning. In a world where men pull back, those differences become magnified. Men stockpile skills and resources for uncertain times. They learn to repair things, trade services, and operate in gray economies that bypass some traditional channels. Women who counted on external support, whether from partners or institutions, discover that those backups are less reliable than advertised. Debt levels rise for those who maintain high spending habits without corresponding income growth or shared household economics. The minimalist single man saves and invests, while the single woman navigating the same economy often faces higher relative costs for housing services and daily needs without the buffering effect of combined resources. Artificial intelligence is about to accelerate all of this in ways that are hard to overstate. Companies are pouring money into systems that can handle creative tasks, customer service, and even personalized companionship. Within the next couple of years, platforms that once relied on human performers for adult content are expected to shift heavily toward generated alternatives that never tire, complain, or demand reciprocity. Young men already experimenting with chat tools for conversation are finding them reliable and low maintenance compared to the ups and downs of real world dating. This is not science fiction. It is the logical extension of technology that improves every quarter, and men who feel burned by past experiences are early adopters because it gives them control without the emotional overhead. Women who built income streams in those spaces will need to pivot quickly as the market fragments and preferences change. The broader job market faces similar disruption as automation replaces roles that once provided steady paychecks. Men who see it coming are building parallel skills in areas like coding trading or hands on trades that resist easy replacement. Women who were funneled into certain fields through educational trends may find themselves competing in saturated markets while new opportunities favor different strengths. The tax and spending imbalance adds another layer of pressure on the system. Men continue to shoulder the majority of income tax contributions in most developed economies, even as they work fewer hours on average in some sectors or shift to freelance models that optimize for lifestyle. Women drive the bulk of consumer purchases, from clothing to household goods to services. When men reduce their earnings or redirect their money into investments or low tax strategies, the government revenue side takes a hit. Programs that support social services or family initiatives feel that squeeze, and suddenly calls for men to step back into traditional roles grow louder. But men have heard those calls before and they have seen the outcomes. They remember decades of messaging that painted their natural traits as problematic. They remember movements that encourage suspicion rather than cooperation. And they have chosen the path of least resistance, which is building lives that do not depend on being needed in the old ways. This is where the sobering part lands for anyone paying attention. Societies built on the assumption that men would always chase, provide, and commit without question are discovering that assumption was never guaranteed. It was a cultural norm that held as long as the benefits felt worth the costs. When the costs rose through legal risks, social pressures, and eroded respect, the norm shifted. Men did not need a coordinated movement to make it happen. They simply stopped showing up in the same numbers for the old script. The result is visible in declining marriage rates, lower birth numbers, and economic sectors adjusting to reduced demand from traditional pairings. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. It is visible in friend groups where guys talk about their latest project or investment instead of their latest date. It is visible in the quiet satisfaction many men report when they realize their happiness does not require constant validation from the opposite sex. Women who once expected doors to open and bills to be covered without much reciprocity are learning that expectations have reset. Men treat interactions more equally now, which means help is offered when asked and earned rather than assumed. Dates become more balanced or they do not happen at all. Help with heavy tasks or roadside issues comes when it feels safe and mutual rather than as an automatic duty. This is not punishment. It is the logical outcome of years of rhetoric that demanded equality in every area except when convenience suggested otherwise. Men took the equality message seriously and applied it across the board. The peace they found in solitude or male focused activities proved more appealing than the alternative for a growing number. I mean, savings accounts grew, stress levels dropped, focus sharpened on goals that delivered measurable results. Parallel ecosystems are forming in plain sight. Crypto communities allow borderless transactions and skill based economies where value is exchanged directly without middlemen. Prepping networks share knowledge on self reliance and resilience. Bartering circles trade labor or goods among trusted participants. These spaces often develop organically among men who value competence and results over social signaling. Women who try to enter sometimes face higher barriers or adjusted pricing because the trust and history are not there. An electrician might quote standard rates to a regular client, but double it for a one off call from someone outside the circle. It is not personal. It is risk management in an environment where past experiences taught caution. Men who want companionship or fun are increasingly selective, and many prefer the overseas option where cultural alignment feels easier and costs allow for a higher quality of life. The restaurant and hospitality sector is feeling this in real time. Fewer date nights mean fewer reservations at mid level spots that counted on couples. Bars see slower nights when the male customers who drove group spending stay home with friends or hobbies. The club scene shifts toward events that cater to single women, but without the spending power that came from mixed dynamics, the profits thin out. Gyms that once thrived on male memberships adjust their marketing. But the heavy lifting culture migrates to home garages or private facilities where the atmosphere stays focused and distraction free. These changes are not catastrophic in a single year, but over a decade, They reshape local economies and employment patterns. Young men entering the workforce see the landscape clearly. They watch older generations deal with the fallout of broken agreements, and they choose different priorities from the start. Minimalism, investing in skills, and building networks that serve their own goals become the default rather than the exception. South Korea again shows the speed at which things can accelerate. The workplace pushback, where men openly chose to compete rather than mentor in certain dynamics, changed promotion paths and team compositions. Media that lost its edge saw viewership fragment as audiences sought content that matched their preferences elsewhere. The three strike policy on approaches turned a social game into a legal minefield, and men simply opted out rather than risk it. Birth rates did not recover because the underlying trust issues remained. Men focused on career stability and personal interests. Women navigated higher expectations in education and work, but found the relationship side of life more challenging than planned. The government threw incentives at the problem, but money alone does not rebuild the everyday comfort that used to lead to pairings. Similar pressures are building in other nations with high living costs and intense work cultures. When men disengage, the demographic math gets harder to ignore. Artificial intelligence companions are moving from novelty to mainstream faster than many expected. Men who value consistency and low drama find them appealing for conversation practice or simple companionship without the cycle of hope and disappointment that can come with dating apps. The technology improves rapidly, and companies see the market potential among a generation that grew up with screens as constant companions. In the adult industry, the shift toward generated content could redirect billions in spending within a short window. Performers who built followings on personal appeal will need to adapt or diversify as audiences fragment. Men who once spent on those platforms redirect funds toward assets or experiences that build their own security. The broader economy feels the ripple as spending patterns change and entire categories lose their reliable customer base. Men pay the majority of taxes, yet they are also the group most likely to simplify their lifestyles and reduce taxable income when incentives align that way. Women drive consumer spending, but in a single income reality that spending faces limits without the dual household boost. The state that positioned itself as the ultimate provider finds its coffers under pressure when the high earning, high tax segment pulls back. Calls for men to return to the old roles grow, but those calls land on ears that have already heard the previous chapters of the story. Men remember the messaging that framed their ambition as toxic or their protection as control. They remember the legal frameworks that tilted outcomes in divorce or accusation cases. And they remember the peace that arrived when they stopped fighting for a seat at a table that did not seem to want them there anyway. This is the raw truth that sits under all the noise. Men are not disappearing from society. They are redirecting their energy into paths that serve their own survival and satisfaction first. Video games provide challenge and achievement without judgment. Side projects turn into income streams. Friend circles built on shared interests offer support without emotional complexity. The happiness numbers for single men in many surveys are holding steady or improving because the burdens of performance and provision have lifted. Women, on the other side, are confronting a reality where the state cannot fully substitute for the practical and emotional infrastructure that committed men once provided. Debt accumulates, loneliness in certain age groups rises, and the demographic projections keep pointing toward fewer births and smaller future workforces. The club and bar industry is a microcosm of the larger shift. Venues that once filled with mixed groups now host more single gender nights. Women gather, but the spending is lower because the traditional dynamic of men covering costs has faded. Drinks stay on the table longer or go unordered. The energy changes and owners adjust by cutting hours or changing formats. Restaurants see the same pattern in reservation data. Couples tables that drove weekend revenue are fewer. Groups of men dining together focus on food and conversation rather than impressing dates. The economic signal is clear, and businesses respond by targeting the customers who still show up reliably. Gyms tell a parallel tale. Male membership was the backbone of many facilities because men lifted heavier and came more consistently for strength goals. When harassment concerns or simple preference for privacy led men to home setups or private gyms, the revenue model shifted. Big chains added more cardio or class options, but the core powerlifting culture moved to garages and basements where men control the environment completely. Invite only facilities are springing up in some areas where the focus stays narrow and the membership is selective. Women who enjoyed the mixed atmosphere find the options changing and the old social crossover points disappearing. The overseas migration for men seeking connection is not mass exodus, but it is noticeable enough to matter. Flights to certain Asian and Latin American destinations show patterns of single or divorced men in their 30s and 40s looking for environments where feminine energy feels more complementary. Lower costs allow Western earnings to stretch further, and daily life feels less combative. This is not every man. It is enough to show that the domestic dating market has lost appeal for a segment that once participated without question. Back home, the parallel economies grow stronger. Crypto allows value transfer without banks. Skill bartering bypasses currency in trusted circles. Prepping communities share knowledge on food production, repair, and resilience. These networks often form along lines of competence and reliability, which tend to cluster among men who prioritize results. Artificial intelligence is the accelerator that makes all of this permanent. Jobs that once required human interaction are being automated at scale. Men who pivot early into areas like prompt engineering, trading algorithms, or physical trades that resist full automation position themselves well. Women who followed educational trends toward certain service or administrative fields may find saturation and displacement hitting harder. The consumer side shifts as men who save more and spend less on status items reduce demand for categories that relied on impulse or social signaling. The birth rate data continues to trend downward because the foundational step of pairing off is happening less frequently across income levels and education backgrounds. In South Korea, the workplace dynamics shifted when men took feminist critiques at face value and began to compete openly rather than mentor across gender lines. Promotions and project assignments reflected that change, and team compositions adjusted. Media that removed edgy content to satisfy equality demands lost audiences who preferred sharper material, and those audiences found alternatives online or abroad. The three strike dating rule turned potential connections into calculated risks, and men chose calculation over risk. Birth numbers fell not because women alone opted out, but because the entire interaction pipeline narrowed. Governments responded with cash incentives and policy tweaks, but the cultural distance remained. Japan faces similar headwinds with long work hours and high costs compounding the withdrawal. China sees its own version as economic pressures meet changing expectations. The United States is on the same trajectory with the 2030 projection, serving as a milestone rather than a surprise. Men building home gyms or joining private facilities are not making a political statement. They are optimizing for results in an environment that feels safer and more focused. The equipment is basic, the music is what they choose, and the conversation stays on progress rather than social drama. Invite only setups ensure the culture stays aligned with strength and discipline. Women who once used mixed gyms for both fitness and social crossover find the landscape different and the old icebreakers less common. The restaurant data shows weekend tables for two declining, while solo or small male group dining holds steadier because the motivation is sustenance and company rather than courtship. The tax disparity is not a secret. Men generate the majority of high income earnings that feed the treasury. When they simplify their lives or shift to lower tax structures, the collections slow. Women, as the primary consumers, keep retail and service sectors moving, but without the dual income boost or shared expenses, the individual burden grows. State programs that expanded under the assumption of steady revenue face shortfalls, and the conversation turns back to personal responsibility. Men have already had that conversation internally, and many decided that responsibility starts with protecting their own peace and resources first. The old provider contract was torn up over decades of legal and cultural changes. Men read the new terms and chose not to sign. This is the wake up call that sits in the background of all the surface noise. Societies function best when men and women build complementary lives based on mutual respect and clear expectations. When one side spends years framing the other as the problem, the trust erodes and people adapt by disengaging. Men adapted by turning inward and outward to new opportunities rather than fighting for the old arrangement. The happiness they report in solitude or male focused routines is real because it comes from alignment with their nature. The challenges for women come from discovering that independence without the supporting structures of partnership or stable institutions carries higher costs than advertised. Debt rises, loneliness creeps in, and the demographic math signals future strain on everything from labor markets to entitlement programs. The manosphere content that exploded in recent years did not create the shift, it reflected it. Men seeking straightforward analysis of dating economics, fitness finance, and social patterns found creators who spoke in plain language without sugarcoating. Channels that started in one niche expanded into gender dynamics because the questions kept coming. Mathematicians modeled behavior with equations. Finance guys applied risk assessment to relationships. Gamers analyzed how titles changed under external pressures. The common thread was men wanting tools to navigate reality rather than ideals. Artificial intelligence chat tools fit neatly into that search for reliable interaction without the variability of human emotions. Young men use them for practice or companionship, and the technology only improves from there. Overseas options remain a pressure release valve for men who still seek traditional dynamics. The cost of living in places like the Philippines allows a comfortable life on modest Western earnings. Women there often carry themselves with agreeableness and femininity that feels refreshing after years of tension. Men who relocate or visit regularly report higher satisfaction and lower stress. This is not abandonment of home countries. It is selective migration for personal fulfillment. Back home, the parallel systems grow. Crypto wallets hold value outside traditional banks. Skill lists circulate in private groups for bartering. Prepping forums share techniques for food security and repair. These are not revolutionary cells. They are practical responses to uncertainty from men who value self reliance. The club scene has changed in visible ways. Friday nights that once mixed genders evenly now show heavier female attendance in many venues. Women wait for attention that does not arrive as readily because men are elsewhere or simply not in the mood to engage. Drink sales slow because the buyers who once covered rounds are absent. The energy shifts and management adjusts with themed nights or earlier closing times. Bars that catered to after work crowds see similar patterns when men choose home setups or friend houses over public mixing. The social crossover points that used to spark connections are fewer, and the culture adjusts to the new reality. Gyms are evolving in the same direction. Home setups with basic racks and weights allow men to train on their schedule without the social layer. Private facilities with strict membership keep the focus on heavy lifting and progress tracking. The big commercial gyms respond with more group classes and amenities, but the dedicated strength community has partially migrated. Women who enjoyed the mixed environment notice the change in crowd composition and atmosphere. The old casual interactions that sometimes led to numbers exchanged are rarer because men are there to train, not to socialize. The restaurant industry tracks the decline in date related spending. Mid level chains that relied on couples for weekend traffic see slower growth. Upscale spots that counted on men treating for anniversaries or special occasions adjust portion sizes or promotions to attract different crowds. Solo male diners or small groups of guys focused on food and talk keep some revenue flowing, but the big ticket shared experiences are down. The data accumulates over quarters, and owners make hard calls on staffing and locations. South Korea accelerated the timeline with its cultural responses. The dating limit policy turned approaches into calculated risks and men limited exposure. Workplace dynamics shifted toward open competition rather than cross gender support. Media lost its bite and audiences fragmented. Birth rates dropped as the pipeline of everyday interactions narrowed. Government incentives could not reverse the cultural distance that had grown. Other nations with similar pressures are watching the same forces at work. High cost, long hours, and eroded trust combine to make pairing less automatic. Men building parallel lives are not doing it out of spite. They are doing it because it works for them. Savings grow when expenses stay low. Skills compound when time is protected. Happiness stabilizes when drama is minimized. The broader society feels the absence in demographics and economic sectors, but the men themselves report clarity and purpose. Women navigating the new landscape face higher individual costs for housing services and daily life without the shared model that once buffered them. The state that encouraged reliance on its structures finds its resources stretched thinner when tax contributions slow. Artificial intelligence is the wild card that locks in the changes. Companionship tools become more sophisticated, and men who value control and consistency adopt them early. Adult content platforms shift toward generated options and spending redirects. Job automation hits service and administrative roles, while men in trades or tech pivot faster in some cases. The consumer economy adjusts to new spending patterns as minimalist mindsets spread among single men. Birth projections continue downward because the first step of forming stable pairs happens less often. The tax reality remains. Men generate the bulk of high earnings that feed public coffers. When they optimize for lower taxable income or fewer hours, the collections dip. Women as consumers keep retail moving but face limits without dual incomes. Programs that expanded during higher revenue years face adjustments, and the conversation returns to personal responsibility. Men already made their adjustments. They protect their peace and resources first after years of seeing the alternative outcomes. This is the straightforward picture. Men walked away not with anger, but with calculation. They found peace and solitude and purpose in self directed paths. The systems that counted on their constant participation are adjusting, and the demographic signals are clear. Societies that want balance will need to address the trust gap rather than demand return to old scripts. The numbers on single childless women by 2030 are not opinions. They are projections based on current trajectories. The restaurant tables, the gym memberships, the tax revenues, and the birth rates all tell the same story. Men are prioritizing their own survival and satisfaction, and the world is changing around that choice. The manosphere provides the language and analysis that helps men make sense of the shift. Content on finance, fitness, and dynamics gives practical tools without fluff. Artificial intelligence fits the need for reliable interaction. Overseas options provide outlets for those seeking traditional connection. Parallel economies offer independence from systems that feel unreliable. The overall trend is men building lives that work for them in the current environment rather than fighting to restore the past. Women who expected continued pursuit and provision are confronting a reset. Help is offered when earned, not assumed. Dates happen when mutual interest is clear, not as default obligation. The peace men found is attractive to them and hard to replicate through policy or messaging. The sobering reality is that decades of framing men as the problem led to men solving their own problems by stepping back. The consequences are visible in empty tables, quieter venues, and changing demographics. The wake up call is that this is not temporary. It is the new baseline until trust and incentives realign in ways that make participation feel worth it again for men. The projections coming out of places like Morgan Stanley make it impossible to ignore what is unfolding, because when nearly half of women in those key years sit single and without kids, the entire structure of how societies plan for the future starts to crack under the weight. Economists tracking workforce participation and spending habits see the single woman segment growing faster than the overall population, and they flag it as a boost for certain wage categories in the short run. Yet the deeper math reveals strain on everything from housing demand to retirement systems that counted on steady family formation to keep contributions flowing. Men who once formed the backbone of dual income stability are instead routing their earnings into personal accounts or low overhead ventures that keep their lifestyles light and their options open. This creates a feedback loop where consumer categories tied to shared living or courtship see softer demand, while sectors built around individual self reliance pick up steam in unexpected ways. Think about how real estate markets that pushed family sized units or couple friendly apartments now face inventory sitting longer in some neighborhoods because fewer pairings mean fewer moves into larger spaces and more people optimizing for solo efficiency with smaller footprints or shared male living setups that cut costs without the emotional overhead. The hospitality world feels this in the booking patterns that used to spike around weekends and holidays when men planned outings or celebrations that included women. Those spikes flatten as more guys decide the return on a fancy dinner or event ticket does not justify the uncertainty, and they redirect that budget toward equipment for hobbies or investments that compound without requiring constant maintenance. Service staff who relied on generous tips from mixed groups notice the difference when tables turn over with men eating quickly among themselves or skipping the upsell on drinks and desserts that once padded checks. Owners adapt by trimming menus or shifting to quicker formats that appeal to efficiency minded customers rather than lingering romantic experiences. The same logic ripples into entertainment venues where promoters once built nights around the draw of mixed crowds looking for connection. When the male side of that equation steps back, the turnout changes and the revenue from bottle service or group packages that depended on guys covering costs dries up, forcing a pivot to niche events or earlier hours that match the new attendance realities. Fitness culture has undergone its own quiet reorganization as men who used to view the gym as a social arena as much as a training ground now treat it as pure function. They invest in compact home rigs that deliver progressive overload without the commute or the layer of social navigation that can sap energy after a long day. Private training circles form through word of mouth, where participants vet each other for a commitment to the work, and the atmosphere stays locked on measurable gains rather than side conversations that distract from the lift. Commercial facilities respond by expanding class offerings aimed at different motivations, but the dedicated strength crowd migrates to spaces where the culture matches their intensity and the overhead stays minimal. This leaves some larger gyms recalibrating their membership models around users who prioritize convenience or variety over raw progression, and the overall foot traffic from the high commitment segment shifts elsewhere without fanfare. The caution around everyday helpfulness marks another layer of the distance that has settled in. Stories circulate about roadside breakdowns or minor emergencies where men who once pulled over without thinking twice now weigh the potential for misinterpretation or lack of basic gratitude, and they keep driving unless the situation clearly demands intervention. It is not a blanket refusal to assist anyone, but a calibrated response shaped by years of hearing that unsolicited help can cross into unwanted territory or lead to complications that outweigh the simple act. Blue collar workers at gas stations or job sites who used to offer a hand with heavy loads or flat tires now wait for a direct request, and even then, they frame it as a paid service rather than an automatic courtesy. The result is women handling more of those situations through formal channels like roadside assistance apps, which add cost and time, but remove the ambiguity that once made spontaneous help feel natural. This recalibration extends to small daily gestures like holding doors or offering seats in crowded spaces where the default has moved toward strict equality unless clear signals indicate otherwise. Governments watching the birth numbers slide in places like South Korea have tried cash bonuses, housing subsidies, and public campaigns to encourage family starts. But those measures run into the harder reality that trust between the sexes has eroded faster than policy can rebuild it. Incentives that focus on financial relief do not address the everyday friction in workplaces or social settings where men have learned to limit exposure to avoid missteps that carry professional or legal weight. While media that once portrayed sharp banter or traditional dynamics as harmless now faces calls for stricter standards, and audiences fragment as men seek out content that aligns with their lived experience rather than sanitized versions. The push for equality in every interaction has led to environments where men compete directly without the mentoring layer that used to smooth progress across groups. And the outcome is teams that form along lines of comfort and reliability rather than forced mixing. Birth rates stay low, not because one side alone refuses, but because the pipeline of casual interactions that historically led to deeper commitments has narrowed under the weight of caution and self protection. In Japan and China, similar pressures compound with intense work schedules and high urban costs that already make family formation a heavy lift. Men there channel energy into career ladders or personal hobbies that deliver clear returns, while the social side stays minimal to preserve mental bandwidth. Women who pursued advanced education and professional paths find the relationship market more competitive than expected when the pool of willing partners shrinks under the same economic and cultural headwinds. The demographic forecasts show aging populations and shrinking labor forces that worry planners, yet the responses often double down on financial carrots without tackling the relational disconnect that keeps pairings from forming in the first place. Men who see the writing on the wall prioritize skills that travel well or assets that hold value across borders so they can maintain flexibility rather than lock into systems that feel unstable. The technology wave coming down the line accelerates the separation in ways that feel inevitable once you track the investment patterns. Companies pour resources into systems that simulate conversation companionship and even creative collaboration with a consistency that human interactions struggle to match after years of heightened expectations on both sides. Young men experimenting with these tools discover they can practice social skills or simply unwind without the cycle of buildup and letdown that comes with real world attempts at connection. The adult content space stands on the edge of a major reconfiguration as generated alternatives improve in realism and availability, reducing reliance on human performers who once commanded steady followings. Spending that used to flow into those platforms redirects toward tools, hobbies, or savings vehicles that men control directly, and the shift happens quietly as preferences adapt to what feels reliable and low risk. Broader job automation hits sectors that once provided stable middle paths, and men who read the trends early move into areas like specialized trades, algorithm work, or independent contracting, where they set the terms and scale according to their own capacity. Women who followed certain educational routes into service or administrative fields encounter saturation at the same time as new opportunities favor traits like risk tolerance and rapid adaptation that show up more readily in some male cohorts under pressure. The consumer side of the economy adjusts as minimalist approaches spread among men who keep possessions light and focus cash on experiences or assets that serve long term security rather than status displays. Retail categories tied to couple gifting or shared household upgrades see softer movement, while categories around personal optimization or skill building hold firmer. The tax flow tells its own story because the segment of high earners who shoulder the largest share of contributions includes many men who now optimize their structures for lower overall liability once they shed the expenses that came with supporting dual lifestyles. When earnings stay solid, but deductions rise or hours adjust to lifestyle priorities, the revenue side for public programs tightens. And suddenly, initiatives that expanded during higher growth periods face scrutiny or cuts. Women, as the driving force behind many retail and service purchases, keep those wheels turning. Yet without the multiplier effect of combined households, the individual load grows heavier, and the safety net that replaced traditional reliance starts to show its limits. Men who internalized the message of self sufficiency simply applied it across the board, and the peace that followed from reduced drama and increased control over their time proved sticky. Communities feel the change in the rhythm of local events and volunteer pools that once drew balanced participation. School functions or neighborhood gatherings that counted on family units now see more solo attendees or smaller groups, and the energy shifts toward activities that suit independent schedules rather than coordinated couple plans. Volunteer organizations that relied on male labor for heavy setup or technical tasks notice slower response times when guys prioritize their own projects or circles where the return feels direct. Local businesses that thrived on word of mouth from mixed social networks adapt by targeting the reliable segments that still show up consistently, whether that means quick service formats or male oriented product lines that emphasize function over social appeal. The overseas draw for men seeking alignment remains a practical outlet rather than a mass movement. Destinations where daily life carries less tension and costs allow earnings to stretch, offer a reset button for those who still want companionship on terms that feel reciprocal. A guy with steady remote income or savings can establish a comfortable base without the constant negotiation that became common in higher pressure environments back home. This is not rejection of home soil, but a selective choice for environments where feminine presentation and agreeable daily interactions reduce friction and allow focus on building rather than defending. The flow is noticeable enough in travel data and relocation stories to signal that the domestic market has cooled for a portion of the male population that once participated by default. Parallel systems continue to strengthen as men trade skills directly in trusted networks, bypassing some formal channels that add layers of cost or regulation. Mechanic might handle repairs for known contacts at standard rates, while quoting differently for outside calls based on perceived reliability or history. Crypto tools enable transfers that stay outside traditional banking rails, and prepping circles share knowledge on storage production and basic resilience that keeps options open when supply chains tighten. These arrangements form organically around demonstrated competence rather than broad appeals, and they provide buffers against uncertainty without requiring large institutional buy in. Women who attempt entry sometimes encounter adjusted terms because the foundational trust built through shared experience is not automatic, and the practical response is simply to price or limit access accordingly. The dating app landscape reinforces the selectivity because data on interaction patterns shows concentrated interest around a smaller group of profiles, while the majority sit with minimal engagement. Men who log in, occasionally or not at all, discover they can meet their social needs through existing circles or solo pursuits without the investment of time and emotional energy that used to go into endless scrolling and messaging. Women who receive high volumes of initial attention find the follow through rate lower as guys apply stricter filters based on past outcomes and the overall volume of new pairings slows. This is not universal, but the aggregate effect shows up in marriage and birth statistics that keep trending downward across education and income brackets. Educational institutions that once prepared generations for clear gender complementary roles now navigate curricula and campus cultures that emphasize individual achievement, while the postgraduate reality delivers different signals. Young men who absorb the cautionary tales from older cohorts enter the workforce with lower expectations around relational timelines, and they focus on building portable skills or financial cushions that allow independence from the start. Young women who excel academically encounter a job market that rewards output, yet a personal life landscape where the pool of committed partners has thinned under the cumulative weight of cultural messaging and economic pressures. The mismatch creates cohorts that delay or skip milestones that previous generations treated as standard, and the ripple moves through everything from housing inventory to pension planning models that assumed steady replacement rates. The entertainment industry adjusts its output as audiences fragment along preference lines. Content that once assumed mixed viewership with light romance or banter now competes with material that speaks directly to male interest in strategy, achievement, or unfiltered analysis of social patterns. Channels that began in narrow niches expand into broader discussions of risk reward and behavioral logic because the demand for straightforward breakdowns outpaces the supply of polished narratives that avoid hard edges. Men who tune in find frameworks that match their observations without requiring them to perform for approval, and the time they invest there displaces hours that might have gone toward traditional social mixing. Health and wellness spaces see men prioritizing recovery and functional strength through routines that fit their schedules without the social tax. Supplements targeted at optimization move steadily, while group classes that once mixed motivations see attendance sort by intensity level. The data on reported satisfaction among single men in certain surveys points to gains in clarity and reduced stress when the external demands of courtship and provision lift, and that internal shift sustains the outward withdrawal even when economic conditions fluctuate. Longer term, the labor force projections start to incorporate the reality of smaller cohorts entering prime working years, and planners begin modeling scenarios where productivity gains from technology must offset demographic shortfalls. Men who pivot into decentralized work models contribute through output rather than headcount, and they structure their contributions to maximize personal retention rather than feeding large institutional pools. Women who maintain high workforce participation drive certain sectors, yet face the same automation pressures, and the combined effect is an economy that rewards adaptability over longevity in traditional roles. The sobering element sits in how quietly the changes compound. No single law or event flips the switch. Instead, thousands of individual calculations about time, energy, and risk accumulate until the old assumptions no longer hold and new patterns solidify. Men who once defaulted to pursuit and provision now default to protection of their own baseline and the peace that comes with it. Societies that built expectations around constant male engagement discover the supply was never infinite, and the recalibration touches everything from local commerce to national demographic forecasts. The workplace again offers a window into the shift because teams that once mixed freely now form with more caution around cross group collaboration when past feedback highlighted gatekeeping or discomfort on either side. Men who hear the call for open competition take it literally and allocate their effort toward peers who share work styles and risk tolerances without layering on extra emotional labor. Promotion paths that used to include informal mentoring across lines tighten as everyone focuses on measurable deliverables, and the culture becomes more transactional in ways that favor efficiency over broad accessibility. This is not exclusion for its own sake, but a response to, to environments where missteps carry heavier weight, and the safest path is clear boundaries and direct communication. Media consumption patterns reveal the same sorting. Platforms that deliver sharp, logical breakdowns of incentives and outcomes gain traction among men seeking tools to navigate uncertainty, while broader entertainment that softens edges or prioritizes certain narratives sees selective dropout. The fragmentation means creators tailor material more narrowly, and the overall discourse splits into lanes where each group finds resonance without constant translation or defense. Men who consume content focused on self directed growth report higher alignment with their daily choices, and that reinforcement loop keeps the withdrawal sustainable. Housing markets in mid sized cities show inventory lingering longer in family oriented segments, while studio and efficiency units move faster among populations optimizing for lower overhead. Developers who once bet on steady couple formation adjust their pipelines toward flexible living options that suit single or minimalist households, and the shift influences everything from zoning conversations to mortgage product design. Men who buy or rent with an eye toward resale value or easy exit maintain liquidity that supports their preference for mobility over rooted commitment under uncertain relational conditions. Transportation and mobility trends tilt toward vehicles and services that emphasize reliability and low maintenance because men who travel light or work remotely prioritize function that does not require constant shared planning. Rideshare data in some markets shows patterns of solo or small group usage rather than frequent couple or family trips, and the algorithms adjust pricing and availability accordingly. The cumulative effect is infrastructure that serves more independent users. And planners who once modeled around household units revisit their forecasts with updated assumptions about formation rates. The education to employment pipeline carries the imprint as well. Vocational programs that teach trades resistant to quick automation see steady enrollment from men who value tangible skills and immediate applicability. University tracks that feed into saturated professional fields face questions about return on investment when the lifestyle payoff includes higher debt without the traditional family stabilizer. Men who choose paths with clear, measurable progress avoid the ambiguity that comes with fields where social dynamics play a larger unspoken role, and they build careers that align with the self reliant mindset that has taken root. Retail environments adapt their layouts and inventory as foot traffic from mixed groups softens, and solo male shoppers focus on targeted purchases that solve specific needs rather than browsing for shared items. Stores that once stocked heavy on couple or gifting categories recalibrate toward personal care tools or hobby supplies that move consistently among the demographic that still shows up regularly. The data on spending velocity shows men holding cash longer for investment or skill acquisition while maintaining lean daily outlays that keep their options open. The broader cultural narrative around success and fulfillment starts to incorporate more voices emphasizing internal metrics over external validation. Men who report stable happiness in simpler structures challenge the old storyline that required constant relational performance to feel complete, and their lived results provide quiet counter evidence that spreads through peer networks. Women navigating higher solo costs or delayed milestones confront the gap between promised independence and the practical load that arrives when support structures thin out and the conversation turns toward what accountability looks like on all sides when the old contracts no longer bind. This is the raw trajectory that keeps unfolding. Each small decision by men to protect their time and resources adds to the larger picture of societies adjusting to lower relational velocity. The economic signals in declining date spending, shifting gym models, and cautious daily interactions all point to the same underlying recalculation. Governments and institutions that respond with financial patches miss the deeper need for a restored mutual value that makes participation feel worthwhile again. Until that gap closes, the patterns of distance and self direction will continue to shape the landscape in ways that reward those who adapt early and leave others scrambling to catch up with a reality that moved while they were still debating the old rules. The technology integration deepens the buffer as well. Tools that handle routine tasks or provide consistent feedback allow men to operate with fewer dependencies, and they invest time in mastering those interfaces because the return is predictable. The adult space transition towards synthetic options redirects capital flows that once supported human centered platforms, and the capital chases efficiency wherever it appears. Job sectors that automate fastest push displaced workers toward reskilling in areas where human judgment or physical presence still carries weight, and men who move quickly capture those openings while maintaining the minimalist framework that shields them from volatility. Community level changes appear in the membership numbers for civic groups or hobby clubs that once served as neutral mixing points. When men reduce their involvement, the volunteer base skews and activities shift toward formats that match the remaining participants. Local economies that counted on steady social spending from balanced crowds see slower cycles, and businesses experiment with loyalty programs aimed at the consistent segments rather than hoping for rebound in the traditional pairing market. The overseas option functions as a safety valve for those whose preferences still lean toward complementary dynamics. Lower daily friction and cost structures allow a quality of life that feels restorative, and the stories that filter back reinforce the choice for men weighing the domestic alternative. It is a practical migration of lifestyle rather than ideology, and it highlights how selective the overall withdrawal really is. Not every man leaves the country, but enough explore the contrast to keep the pressure on domestic norms to evolve or risk further disengagement. Parallel economies gain resilience as participants test direct value exchange in controlled circles. A skilled tradesperson might offer services within the network at rates based on reciprocity while maintaining standard pricing outside where trust is unproven. Crypto facilitates settlement without intermediaries, and prepping knowledge spreads through documented results rather than theory. These systems do not replace the mainstream, but they provide redundancy that men value when larger structures show strain, and the barrier to entry favors those who demonstrate reliability over time. The dating market data continues to show concentration effects, where a limited group receives disproportionate attention, and the majority experiences lower response rates that discourage investment. Men who step back entirely or use the platform sporadically report reclaiming hours that once went into maintenance of marginal connections, and they redirect that time toward compounding activities that deliver clearer progress. The overall formation rate slows, and the demographic charts reflect it across regions with similar cultural pressures. Educational outcomes feed into this as cohorts graduate with different expectations shaped by the observed realities of prior groups. Men who prioritize trades or entrepreneurial paths enter with built in flexibility, and they structure their early careers around skill stacking that supports independence. The relational timeline stretches or drops lower on the priority list when the perceived costs outweigh the benefits under current conditions, and that choice cascades into housing, labor, and consumption forecasts that institutions must now revise. The media landscape sorts further as creators respond to audience signals. Material that delivers unvarnished analysis of incentives and outcomes holds attention among men seeking practical frameworks, while polished productions that avoid discomfort see selective tuning out. The split allows each lane to deepen without constant cross pressure, and men who find alignment there reinforce their choices with information that matches their daily navigation. Health metrics among men who maintain consistent solo routines show stability in areas tied to reduced stress and focused effort. They optimize recovery around their own schedules, and the absence of external emotional labor frees bandwidth for consistent training or skill work. The reported sense of control sustains the pattern even when external voices call for return to older models, because the internal math favors the current setup. Longer horizon planning by governments and corporations starts to model lower household formation, and they adjust infrastructure and benefit designs accordingly. Productivity assumptions incorporate higher automation offsets, and labor policies shift toward attracting adaptable workers rather than assuming traditional family stabilizers. Men who already operate in that mode position themselves ahead of the curve, while the broader system plays catch up with realities that solidified through countless individual decisions. The wake up sits in recognizing that the withdrawal is rational response rather than rebellion. Men calculated the risks and rewards under updated terms, and they chose paths that protect their baseline while opening new avenues for growth. Societies that want different outcomes will need to address the incentive structure and trust deficit directly, rather than layering on expectations that no longer match the lived environment. The numbers on future single populations and the visible adjustments in daily commerce and social patterns all confirm the direction. The question becomes how quickly the rest of the structure adapts to a world where men prioritize their own peace and competence first. To the 1 hour gang who made it all the way through, thank you for sticking with it. If you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show some support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description of the video. Let me know in the comments what you thought about what we discussed today. Do you agree with the patterns we laid out, or do you see things differently? Share your thoughts honestly because the conversation matters. Like the video if you like it. Do not forget to subscribe, and if you like the video, share the video, and just remember that all roads lead to MWA men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.